Canada didn't yell, didn't hoist a flag, didn't sling threats. It silently unleashed 7 razor-sharp laws and walked away, leaving 6 American states, Florida, Michigan, Texas, New York, Iowa, and Minnesota, staggering under a relentless economic hurricane, bleeding jobs, hemorrhaging billions in exports, and teetering on the edge of collapse. This isn't some overblown cable news circus or political spin. It's a seismic economic upheaval that's already vaporized over $12 billion in just 6 months, slashed truck routes by 37%, obliterated Canadian tourism to U.S. cities, and severed critical supplies like meat, oil, tech, and electricity in ways that blindsided communities and industries alike. If you're in Florida's sun-drenched condos, Michigan's gritty factory towns, Texas's sprawling oil fields, New York's bustling cities, Iowa's quiet farmlands, or Minnesota's rural outposts, the fallout might already be slamming your paycheck, your business, or your town's future. So, what exactly did Canada pull off to wreak this havoc? Why are these 6 states the epicenter of the pain? This video rips it apart, law by law, state by state. And if you're in one of these places, this isn't just a story, it's a blaring alarm you can't ignore. Hit that like button, subscribe for more updates, and drop a comment if you're seeing the cracks where you live. In just 6 weeks, Canada rolled out 7 devastating laws, none loud enough to dominate headlines, but each a calculated gut punch to the US economy, engineered to shield Canadian interests while exposing American vulnerabilities with surgical precision. These weren't hollow diplomatic stances or toothless warnings. They were ironclad, enforceable policies that have erected an economic fortress, rewriting the rules of cross-border trade overnight. First up, a digital platform tax slams U.S. tech titans like Google, Meta, and Amazon, choking their Canadian revenue streams and forcing them to overhaul their business models. A Travel Safety Designation Act warns Canadians to steer clear of certain U.S. states, citing political unrest and safety concerns, gutting tourism dollars that propped up local economies. An import sanitation ban blocks U.S. meat and produce over tightened Canadian standards on hormones, pesticides, and additives, stranding truckloads at the border. The Energy Export Licensing Act throttles electricity exports to the U.S., prioritizing nations with cooperative trade ties over a U.S. deemed unreliable. The Tourism and Media Shield Act halts all federally funded promotion of U.S. travel destinations, severing marketing lifelines that fueled visitor influxes. A border rights protection law clamps down on cooperation with U.S. immigration and customs enforcement, snarling border operations and trade flows. An automatic tariff trigger that hits back with counter-tariffs within 72 hours of any U.S. trade action, ensuring Canada's retaliation is swift and merciless. Individually, these laws might seem like bureaucratic fine print, but together they've forged an impenetrable legal firewall, and states hooked on Canadian trade, energy, agriculture, or tourism are now paying the price. Let's count down the carnage, starting with number 6. Minnesota, a state tethered to Canada, not just by its northern border, but by a vital economic lifeline, now fraying like a worn rope. Minnesota depends on Manitoba's hydroelectric power to keep its grid stable, but the Energy Export Licensing Act has thrown that into chaos, requiring new licenses that favor countries with stable trade relations, and the U.S. isn't on that list. In places like Duluth and Bemidji, households and small manufacturers, already scraping by, face electricity price spikes of 15 to 20%, threatening family budgets and forcing factories to cut shifts or shutter entirely, like the paper mill in International Falls that laid off 50 workers last month. Tourism's been crushed. The Boundary Waters Canoe Area and North Shore resorts, once magnets for tens of thousands of Canadian summer campers from Winnipeg and Thunder Bay, are now flagged as risky under the Travel Safety Designation Act, causing a 31% plunge in bookings, leaving campgrounds in Grand Marais deserted, lodges in 2 harbors half empty, and outdoor gear shops like Joe's Sporting Goods in Ely reporting their worst summer in a decade, with some owners dipping into personal savings to stay afloat. The digital economy's reeling too, with Minneapolis tech startups and ad agencies, like the small firm in St. Paul that lost a $2 million Canadian contract, hemorrhaging clients due to the digital platform tax and stricter data regulations that make U.S. partnerships toxic. Minnesota's iron ore and machinery exports, once flowing seamlessly to Canadian factories, now face delays, inspections, or outright rejections under the import sanitation ban, costing Iron Range companies millions and killing deals with Canadian manufacturers in Ontario. This isn't just trade tension, it's a silent, legal wrecking ball, and Minnesota's just starting to feel the rubble. Number 5. New York, the global juggernaut of finance, culture, and clout. But even titans can stumble, and Canada's laws have triggered a quiet earthquake. Over 3.5 million Canadians used to swarm New York annually, packing Manhattan's boutique hotels, Buffalo's mom-and-pop diners, and Niagara Falls outlet malls. But the Travel Safety Designation Act has branded parts of the state politically unstable, slashing Canadian reservations by 28% in under a year, hitting businesses from Times Square to the Canadian border, like the family-run motel in Plattsburgh that's now operating at half capacity. The Tourism and Media Shield Act has axed all Canadian government funding for promoting U.S. destinations, meaning no more subsidized travel packages or tour groups boosting New York's global draw, leaving tourism boards in Buffalo and Rochester scrambling to fill the gap. Wall Street's taking a hit too, with the digital platform tax pushing Canadian regulators to ditch US-based data platforms, shrinking contracts for digital advertising, fintech services, and data infrastructure. Some Manhattan firms, like a mid-sized ad agency in Midtown, report losses in the millions as Canadian clients pivot to European providers like London-based tech firms. New York's $17 billion in annual exports to Canada, electronics, processed foods, and chemicals, face delays, inspections, or outright rejection under the import sanitation ban, unraveling decades of seamless trade ties and exposing cracks in the Empire State's economic foundation, with small exporters in Syracuse losing long-standing contracts overnight. Number 4. Iowa, the unassuming agricultural heartland, now ground zero in Canada's trade playbook, where its pork, corn, and soybean exports, long the backbone of its economy, relied on Canada as a rock-solid buyer. The import sanitation ban has slammed the brakes, rejecting pork shipments over feed additives and hormones that no longer meet Canada's tightened standards, leaving truckloads spoiling in storage or sold at a loss in secondary markets, devastating farmers in places like Des Moines, where a third-generation hog farmer named Tom recently had to sell his equipment to cover debts. Corn and soybeans face similar scrutiny, with new pesticide rules rendering crops non-compliant, clogging grain elevators in rural counties like Polk and Story with nowhere to send the harvest, forcing farmers to watch their livelihoods pile up unsold. Fertilizer prices are skyrocketing as Canadian suppliers exit co-op deals under the Energy Export Licensing Act, and ethanol plants in towns like Cedar Rapids are slashing output or shutting down entirely, like the biofuel co-op that closed last month, laying off 30 workers. The fallout's rippling through rural communities, with packing plants downsizing, seasonal jobs vanishing, and school districts in farm-heavy counties like Boone reporting budget shortfalls as agricultural income collapses, leaving Iowa's once steady economy crumbling with no federal relief in sight. Number 3. Texas, the proud Lone Star state, famed for its oil wealth and unshakable swagger. But Canada's quiet economic war is hitting like a sledgehammer. Texas's massive exports of refined petroleum and liquefied natural gas to Canada are stalling under the Energy Export Licensing Act, which demands politically driven approvals that are slow, selective, and increasingly rare, costing refineries in Houston and Corpus Christi tens of millions in lost contracts, with one major refinery reporting a $15 million hit in Q2 alone. Agriculture's suffering too, with beef, citrus, and cotton shipments rejected under the import sanitation ban for hormone and chemical traces, as Canadian retailers pivot to imports from Brazil and Australia, leaving Texas oranges and beef off shelves in Toronto and Vancouver, and costing growers in the Rio Grande Valley millions. Tourism's unraveling in cities like Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio, long favorites for Canadian snowbirds escaping winter. But the Travel Safety Designation Act has driven a 35% drop in visitors, emptying rental properties and hotel rooms, with resorts in Galveston reporting losses in the hundreds of thousands, and some laying off half their staff. The automatic tariff trigger disrupts long-term export contracts, turning Texas's once robust trade relationship with Canada into a legal minefield, eroding the state's economic confidence and leaving small businesses, like a Dallas-based cotton exporter struggling to survive. Number 2. Michigan, America's industrial heartbeat and a historic bridge to Canada, is watching its decades-long synergy with Ontario fracture under the weight of these laws. The auto industry, Michigan's lifeblood, is reeling from the automatic tariff trigger, which retaliates within 72 hours of U.S. tariff hikes, targeting auto parts, aluminum, and machinery, canceling contracts and driving costs sky-high as Canadian buyers turn to Europe and Asia for cheaper alternatives. Hitting plants in Detroit and Flint hard, with one Flint factory laying off 200 workers last month. Tourism's crumbling, with Canadian visitors to Traverse City, Detroit, and the Great Lakes deterred by travel warnings citing political instability, slashing border crossings by over 40% and leaving lakefront resorts, restaurants, and shops in places like Mackinac City deserted. With businesses like a family-owned diner closing after 30 years, Michigan's apples, dairy, and packaged goods are blocked by the import sanitation ban over pesticide, labeling, and packaging issues, costing farmers millions, while Ann Arbor's tech firms lose Canadian university and business contracts due to data laws and taxes, betraying Michigan's role as America's gateway to Canada, and leaving workers like Sarah, a tech developer, jobless after a major deal collapsed. Number 1. Florida, once Canada's sunny winter playground, is now the boycott's biggest casualty. With Canadian snowbirds pumping $6 billion yearly into beaches, golf courses, and condos, dropping by a staggering 42% as the Travel Safety Designation Act flags the state for political tension, healthcare risks, and rising gun violence, prompting Canadian insurers to pull coverage for long stays, leaving rental communities in Naples, Sarasota, and Fort Lauderdale half empty, and turning snowbird hotspots into ghost towns, with property managers like Maria in Naples reporting 60% vacancy rates. The Tourism and Media Shield Act bans Canadian government-funded advertising for destinations like Disney World, Miami, and the Florida Keys, tanking travel packages and slashing demand from Canadian tour operators, costing Orlando's tourism sector millions. Florida's $9 billion citrus industry faces warehouse backlogs and plummeting prices due to pesticide-related import rejections, with growers in Orlando and Tampa, like a cooperative in Polk County, losing $2 million in a single season. The cruise industry, a major economic driver, sees Canadian bookings from ports like Miami and Fort Lauderdale plummet due to the digital tax and travel warnings, with cruise lines like Royal Caribbean reporting 30% revenue drops on Canada-heavy routes. Canada's laws aren't a passing storm, they're a structural overhaul, reshaping trade, tourism, and trust, with Minnesota, New York, Iowa, Texas, Michigan, and Florida bearing the brunt of an economic crisis that's only deepening. The fallout's rippling far beyond these states, with global trade partners like Japan, South Korea, and the EU closely watching, reassessing their own U.S. trade strategies as Canada's moves signal a new era of retaliatory trade tactics. Small businesses, from Minnesota's outfitters to Florida's condo managers, are slashing staff or closing shop, with a bait-and-tackle store in Duluth shuttering after 15 years. Major corporations like Ford, GM, and Exxon face profit hits that could jolt Wall Street, with GM projecting a $100 million quarterly loss tied to disrupted Canadian supply chains. Economic forecasts warn of a 0.5% U.S. GDP growth dip by 2026 if tensions escalate, while Canada, cushioned by its energy exports and weaker dollar, holds firm, with its leaders citing U.S. trade aggression as justification for their ironclad stance. The U.S.'s response remains muddled, with political gridlock and election year posturing delaying any meaningful counter-strategy, while Canada's policies embolden other nations to consider similar moves, potentially isolating the U.S. in global trade networks. If you're seeing the signs, empty storefronts, soaring utility bills, or disappearing jobs, speak up in the comments, share this video with someone who needs to know, and subscribe for the latest on this unfolding economic disaster, because this story's nowhere near its final chapter.